The First Chechen War remains one of the most complex and devastating conflicts of the post-Soviet era. It was fought not only with weapons, but with memories and identities shaped by centuries of resistance. To understand how it came to this, we have to begin with history, because in Chechnya, history was not background, it was fuel. Chechnya lies in the North Caucasus, a mountainous region where geography hardens societies and shapes strategy. In the 19th century, the Russian Empire struggled to subdue the area, facing decades of guerrilla resistance and enduring legends born in winter camps and mountain passes. Chechen identity was forged in that crucible. Family stories of endurance, communities rebuilt after punitive raids, a culture of autonomy that viewed distant rule with deep suspicion. Those memories converged again in the Soviet era. In 1944, Joseph Stalin accused the Chechen and Ingush peoples of collaborating with Nazi forces. The punishment was collective deportation to Central Asia. Thousands died during the journey and in exile. Those who returned in the late 1950s found homes taken, villages altered, and a stigma that lingered. The memory of deportation became central to Chechen political consciousness, a warning against trusting distant power. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the map of authority dissolved. In Grozny, former Soviet Air Force General Jakhar Dudiev declared the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria independent, betting that Russia's weakened center could not reimpose control on a region with a long tradition of resistance. In the following years, Chechnya operated outside Moscow's authority, building institutions under pressure and seeking recognition. But the turbulence of transition bred internal challenges, fragmented governance, clan rivalries, criminal networks, and a strained economy. In Moscow, Chechnya's de facto independence raised fears of contagion. The question wasn't only Chechnya, it was the precedent. Would other regions follow? By late 1994, President Boris Yeltsin's government decided the situation demanded force. Planners assumed a short, controlled operation, remove Dudiev, install a pro-Moscow administration, restore federal authority. Those assumptions collided with reality almost at once. In December 1994, tens of thousands of Russian troops, many young conscripts with limited training, entered Chechnya with hundreds of armored vehicles. Their immediate objective was Grozny. What they found was not a city waiting to be taken. It was a city turned into a defense system. Chechen fighters reshaped Grozny into a labyrinth. Narrow streets became channels that trapped armor. Basements, stairwells, and upper floors provided vertical angles for anti-tank teams to strike at thin turret plates and tracks. Ruined buildings concealed movement. Local knowledge, every alley, every vantage, every blind turn, let small teams appear, attack, and disengage before heavy firepower could respond. Early assaults were disastrous for Russian columns. Communication broke under pressure. Infantry struggled to shield armor, and units advancing along predictable routes were cut to pieces in minutes. Doctrine calibrated for open terrain offered little protection against a city that fought back from every elevation. For civilians, Grozny became a test of endurance. Utilities failed. Families lived in basements, melting snow for water, rationing food, and lighting rooms with candles. Sheltering, moving, finding medical care, all became calculated risks. Aid was difficult to deliver. Declared corridors were often not safe in practice. Journalists captured images that traveled worldwide. Hospitals under strain. Markets improvised among ruins, people queuing for water beside shattered facades. The 1996 footage is a record of those months, the city wounded, its residents still there, navigating a reality no city should ever endure. Despite heavy losses, Russian forces seized central Grozny in March 1995. The fall of the city did not end the war. Chechen fighters withdrew into mountains and forests and switched fully to guerrilla tactics, ambushes on convoys, raids on outposts, sabotage of supply lines, strikes at weak points, then rapid dispersal. Terrain did the work of a second army. Roads edged with dense cover offered concealment. High ground favored defenders. For Russian units, maintaining presence became as challenging as combat itself. Every convoy needed protection, every route needed clearing again and again. Throughout 1995, Russia tried to consolidate control, pushing into towns and villages, establishing posts, announcing zones of authority, only to face persistent, structured resistance. Chechen commanders including Aslan Moskadov, Shamil Basayev, Ruslan Geliev, and the foreign volunteer Khattab coordinated operations that blended decentralized initiative with strategic coherence. Some teams specialized in hit-and-run assaults, others targeted logistics, still others executed larger raids to force political attention. The effect was to stretch Russian forces thin, making them spend heavily just to hold ground where smaller units could contest them at will. The war's pressure radiated beyond Chechnya. In June 1995, Basayev's raid on Budyanovsk, seizing a hospital and taking over 1,000 civilians hostage, was a national shock. It forced negotiations and exposed the limits of a strictly military approach. Public support for escalation eroded. Families saw conscripts return injured or traumatized. Reports of mismanagement and corruption damaged confidence. The war shifted from a campaign at the periphery to a crisis at the center of Russian politics. Inside Chechnya, civilians shouldered a relentless burden. Villages endured repeated shelling. Agriculture faltered. Schools operated sporadically, often in damaged buildings or basements. Clinics improvised with minimal supplies. Mines and unexploded ordnance turned everyday movement into hazard. Many families fled to neighboring Ingushetia and beyond, where camps strained to provide basics. Those who stayed learned new routines, sharing water and fuel, timing errands between bombardments, planning routes to avoid known dangers, protecting the vulnerable with improvised shelters. Ordinary life didn't end, it narrowed to survival. By early 1996, the war's trajectory bent under political weight even as fighting continued. The Russian government faced declining public support, economic strain, and institutional divisions. Military morale suffered, bleeding confidence under unclear objectives and high casualties. In April 1996, Jakhar Dudayev was killed in a Russian airstrike. Moscow hoped the resistance would fracture. Instead, the narrative of martyrdom deepened resolve. Leadership passed to Aslan Moskadov, a former Soviet artillery officer respected for strategic clarity and the ability to coordinate diverse commanders. Moskadov sought leverage, battlefield pressure that forced negotiation without collapsing civilian endurance. By summer 1996, Chechen forces planned a decisive offensive. On August 6, they infiltrated Grozny in small, agile teams along routes Russians believed secure. Within hours, multiple positions were surrounded or overrun, communications were disrupted, and exhausted Russian units struggled to regroup. The operation underscored a core lesson of the war. Without overwhelming, sustained resources, holding Grozny was politically and operationally untenable. Surprise, local knowledge, and agility could reset the board overnight. Presidential elections loomed in Russia, sharpening the costs of continued conflict. Negotiations followed swiftly. On August 31st, the Kosovo Accord ended major fighting, mandated Russian withdrawal, and deferred the question of Chechnya's legal status. It was not a resolution, it was a truce anchored in political necessity and battlefield realities. For Chechnya, it was a fragile victory. For Russia, it was an acknowledgement that force had reached its limit. By the end of 1996, the guns quieted, but the damage was everywhere. Chechnya's infrastructure lay broken, water systems, electricity grids, roads, bridges. Cities were shattered, economies stalled, and tens of thousands displaced. The post-war order was hard to build. Commanders who had gained prominence during the conflict retained influence, governance blurred with armed authority. Rivalries, political, ideological, and criminal, complicated stabilization. De facto independence did not translate readily into durable civil administration. International recognition was scarce, resources limited, and radical elements grew. The conditions for renewed conflict were present: unresolved status, fractured institutions, and population forced to rebuild on uncertain ground. The war's legacy is tangled and instructive. It revealed the limits of large-scale force in regions where terrain and identity align against centralized control. It showed how assumptions about quick victories collapse in urban environments built like layered defenses and in mountains that punish predictability. It underscored the human cost of decisions made far from the ruins they create. It forced reforms in Russian military thinking, training, doctrine for urban operations, logistics, civil-military relations, and reshaped strategic debates about federal authority and regional autonomy. And it left Chechnya in a limbo where resistance had one space, but not a recognized settlement. The images from 1996 carry these truths in fragments. Soldiers move through streets where every window feels like a threat. Civilians queue at improvised wells. Markets reappear among wreckage, asserting continuity. Children play in courtyards edged with broken concrete because play is stubborn and restorative. A medic works by flashlight. A teacher explains fractions where a blackboard used to be. These are more than scenes. They are arguments that life persists, that communities hold, that dignity can be maintained in small acts even when the structure around them has failed. The Kosovo Accord offered breathing room, but it did not answer the fundamental questions: sovereignty, security, recognition, reconstruction. In that gap, every repaired window, every reopened shop, every classroom improvised under cold light felt like a small defiance of collapse. For Russia, the war became a caution about the relationship between force and legitimacy, about the political costs of prolonged operations, and about the difficulty of imposing solutions on regions with powerful identities. For Chechnya, the post-war years highlighted how hard it is to turn wartime cohesion into stable governance under isolation and scarcity. In the end, the First Chechen War is a story about friction between centralized power and local determination, about terrain that neutralizes doctrine, and about communities that outlast devastation. It warns against the seduction of swift solutions to complex problems. It insists that victory measured in captured ground means little if legitimacy is missing and consent is denied. And it leaves us with an uneasy truth: wars end on paper before they end in people's lives. When we look back at the 1996 footage, soldiers advancing past collapsed facades, civilians navigating shattered avenues, a city scarred but inhabited, we see the residue of choices and the resilience of people. We see a conflict that tested the post-Soviet order and reshaped military thinking. We see, in quiet acts of continuity, a kettle boiled in a basement, a window pane set into a frame, a child learning to write despite the noise, a claim to the future. The First Chechen War did not deliver a neat conclusion. It delivered a pause and lessons written in damage and endurance. Those lessons endure. Understand history before acting in the present, align political aims with operational realities, and never lose sight of the human cost when cities become battlefields. If you appreciate restored historical footage and stories like this, make sure to subscribe to History Safe. Your support helps keep these rare moments from the past alive and accessible. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and share it with others who love history.